I handle extraterrestrial objects at NASA. Up until now, I've been analyzing various rocks and materials from space, with my next big project being analyzing soil samples from Mars. Over the years, the excitement of handling items from space had worn off, and my job was reduced to a simple routine I had to set up for examining and recording the features of everything that was brought to my desk. Recently, I was given a smooth piece of metal that had apparently been found floating in orbit by the folks over at the ISS. When I first examined this hunk of metal, I was intrigued by its seemingly man-made shape, like it was deliberately created by someone and launched into space. It was no bigger than a small, sleek laptop charging brick and had smooth, rounded corners like pebbles in a river. It was an interesting find, and I was a little excited to examine this object. I was surprised that it being man-made wasn't ruled out, because there's a very low chance that this device was naturally created. I was turning it over in my gloved hands when I first realized that it had a small slit on the left side. My heart rate began to quicken. Slipping a piece of paper into the slit caused the entire drive to start morphing. The metal began to melt away like chocolate and molded into a different shape entirely.
This President's Day, you can wait for a sale price, or you can get the best price every day at Bob's Discount Furniture. So shop now to get more of what you love. More style, more comfort, and more choices when you dare to compare at Bob's.
Now, there was a simple circular hole on that side that, upon inspection, seemed to be endless, as I only saw a dark pit no matter how hard I looked inside. I backed away from the device as I realized that I was working with technology so advanced it was beyond our understanding of physics and chemistry itself. This needed to be taken to the higher-ups immediately. Somehow, through the whole process of getting this out of space and onto my desk, no one had realized that this metal exterior hid technological components inside. It also explained why this hadn't yet been taken away by shadowy government organizations. The device had stopped moving and lay still on my table as I stared at it. On one hand, I knew this was well beyond what I could deal with. On the other, a strange curiosity urged me to investigate it just a little further. Perhaps I could find out what it did. It took me hours to get beyond that development. Every time I pushed something through that hole in the side of the device, it would promptly begin to reshape again, until the hole closed in around the inserted object and matched exactly to its shape. It would then whir for a few moments, seeming like it was examining the object, and then spit it out completely, with the metal reshaping into the same original slit. I was getting more and more worried as time ticked. My face felt hot and my hands clammy. I was about to call my boss to hand this over to the higher-ups before I got in trouble when I got a crazy idea. After pushing everything from pens to metal rods into the hole, I decided to put in a simple USB-A connected cable into the hole. It was a random idea, possibly inspired by the fact that the last thing I had in my drawer was that cable, and it was the only thing I hadn't put into the device. As soon as I put the connector into the side of the device, it began to conform to its shape and whir once more. A loud beep filled my entire office. The machine didn't reject the cable and instead kept it inside. My heart began to beat in anticipation as I plugged the cable into my personal laptop. I jumped when the laptop identified the device as a hard drive. It was simply named GSA Drive. I opened the drive, and inside I found one file in a folder. The file was a simple PNG image which depicted the logo of GSA, and under it revealed what the acronym stood for: Global Space Agency. I didn't have time to ponder over the existence of this organization, and instead backed out of the image to click into the other folder, fueled by curiosity. It took me a moment to register the size of that folder. The entire folder was 6,000 petabytes. I quickly called my boss and explained what I had found. He didn't seem to buy it, but promised he'd come as soon as possible and take the device off me. Somehow the fact that I was about to lose this device made me want to dig in just a little further before I gave it back. I knew I was digging my grave, but an urge to know what was inside had overtaken me. I clicked back and quickly checked the hard drive's capacity: 10,000 petabytes. My stomach twisted into knots as I realized that this small hard drive had a capacity more than the modern internet. Only curiosity lured me in and enticed me. My want to explore this drive overtook the growing fear and anxiety that was building up in the back of my mind. I should have handed the drive to the higher-ups and let them deal with it. Much of the folders inside the main folder contained thousands and thousands of files that were all unrecognizable file types. My computer was unable to open or process any of them, and as far as I knew, these file formats did not exist. I found more images of various devices, vehicles, and weapons that seemed impossible to build and defied the laws of matter. However, I didn't have to look far to find a folder titled Hear Me. Inside, I found an audio file that details a disturbing and horrific notion. It explains the existence of the drive and why it's here. I'll play the audio for you so you can hear it yourself. File name: Message from 2299. I don't know who you are or which timeline you exist in. I don't know what date it is for you, and I don't even know if you're a human. As you can see, this is a desperate attempt at making contact. The past needs to know of our mistakes so they can be avoided. Throughout time, humankind has learnt from history, but never from the future. This is, I guess, a learning opportunity to not go down the same path we went. During the year 2050, there was a second, you could call it an industrial revolution. I'm assuming you know of the Industrial Revolution since you have the technology to be hearing this message at all. This Industrial Revolution was a revolution of technology, a massive technological boom built up by the decades of innovation before it. It was a time in which different discoveries from the previous decade came together and allowed us to redefine our devices forever. Soon enough, self-driving cars were replaced by a network of teleportation hubs that broke you down to the very atoms and rebuilt you on the other side. Not to say there weren't accidents, but medicine had advanced to such a degree that death had become a concept of the past. Several thousands of people began to live as minds on humanoid robots in the first few years of this technology's development. Quantum computers were replaced by cybernetic chips. Our own buildings evolved into smart skyscrapers that extended to the brink of the atmosphere. We didn't even spare the oceans, as they soon filled up with skyscrapers and underwater cities. When humanity finished conquering the Earth and rid it of all its other life, they realized the mistakes they had made. Several countries began to destroy cities and build them underground instead to encourage a natural environment on the top. It wasn't climate change that killed life. No, that was realized ages ago. It was the rapid loss of habitat as the population extended beyond the Earth's holding capacity. The only animals and plants that were left were farming necessities that humanity needed. Unfortunately, they could not form a complete ecosystem, and so the environment continued to suffer and break with no solution in sight. So, humanity took to the stars. In a short span of 100 years, all of the planets in the solar system had been terraformed. From the hot desert of Mercury to the icy oceans of Jupiter's moons, people had found a way to live there. The populations continued to expand throughout those years, and somehow began to exceed the capacity of the entire galaxy. What many people didn't realize as they terraformed planet after planet is that they could not create life. They could not build the environment that they had destroyed back on Earth. I was one of the few self-proclaimed space explorers. Like the sea explorers back in the days Earth was Earth. Our job was to find more livable planets that could be terraformed quickly and efficiently. We didn't have the technology to terraform every planet, but planets like Mercury took a lot more time and energy to transform because, after all, we couldn't literally move the planet from its orbit. Given another century, though, I doubt we wouldn't be able to do it. Experimental wormhole technology had gone into development a couple of decades earlier. Space vessels with this form of transport built in were given to anybody who wished to explore space alone, millions of light years away from the closest human. These ships could construct wormholes to another given location in space and pass through them, skipping millions of light years of travel in the process. Just like that, humanity once again began expanding through the observable universe like cracks slowly forming in glass. We encountered no other life form throughout our exploration and believed we were truly alone, until I visited Croton 42A. The planet had deep blue seas and continents full of strange animals. They seemed to be early in their evolution, not yet intelligent. When my ship first landed on the planet, I quickly realized that the atmosphere matched that of the original Earth, rich in oxygen. The planet was an exact duplicate of Earth. In the vastness of the universe, statistics had created a similar planet. I was far, far away from the closest space station. There was no way for me to communicate my find. I didn't explore the planet any further, careful not to disturb the environment and avoid any other possible intelligent life forms that I had not yet seen.
At Walden University, I can get the W. With multiple ways of learning, Walden gets and respects my reality.
My class schedules work for me and my grind.
Get the W. This is learning that's fit for my life. No doubt I'll make an impact with the skills I can use today and the...
Instead, I collected samples from the area that my ship had landed in and promptly left, making sure I sterilized my entire spacesuit in the sterilization room. I took the samples back to the closest human settlement, and after that, news spread like wildfire. I became somewhat of a celebrity, a legendary space explorer who had found a utopia for the wealthiest of people, and had most importantly, found more life in the bleakness of space. It wasn't just me that went right back to the closest human settlement, though. Something had survived the sterilization chamber and came right back with me. It had spread across my entire spaceship and to every person I had contacted. It jumped from person to person and spread quickly. Throughout all these decades of innovation and advancement in technology, we had forgotten one thing. When humanity began to take over the planet, they also eradicated all bacteria and viruses, effectively making sure no one would ever get sick. Medicine advanced too quickly for its own good, and with this growth, it left a gaping hole in itself. A simple virus from a planet millions of light years away began to conquer us, just like we had done to the stars. Just like we had built large networks of heat and light energy converters around the stars, this disease began to surround us. In the first year, half of the entire human population died. The symptoms were simple. The patient's skin would begin to slowly turn blue as the days passed. When the skin had turned completely blue, it would shrivel before the entire body would be unable to hold water. The patient would die a sudden death from dehydration. Whole settlements collapsed into anarchy as people fought for food and resources. Military groups formed and attacked in mobs, stealing resources and food. Wars erupted across the intergalactic utopia humanity had created for themselves and brought buildings to the ground. Nothing could stop it from spreading. We didn't even know how it spread. It seemed to do it through all ways possible. Scientists studying patients began to die, and there was just no way to study the virus without becoming infected yourself. The wealthiest of people began to buy out expensive spaceships to quarantine in, but they were soon attacked as all order collapsed. For a few short months, the chaos and war lit up whole planets like fireworks in the sky. With our advanced weaponry, humans became desperate, animalistic versions of themselves, scrounging for supplies and food while all carrying the virus and transmitting it everywhere. Throughout all of this, I remained alive. I didn't show a single symptom, and somehow the virus had just passed through me. I took my ship and moved away from major human settlements to protect myself, while still listening in to broadcasts and messages from everyone. I watched digitally as entire human settlements went empty and infrastructure began to decay. The population had shrunk until it was confined to just one planet, Earth, the only planet that had not recorded a case of this virus. A small government had protected the planet amongst all the intergalactic chaos. The people on Earth thought that was the end of it, that they had somehow survived against all odds, and that it was up to them to rebuild the intergalactic empire that we had formed. A mystery case stomped on those ambitions and eradicated the rest of the population. After days of not getting a single broadcast or message, I realized that I was possibly the last of my kind in the empty, hopeless vacuum of space. I visited the abandoned colonies, desperate to find a single human being other than myself, but all I found were the bodies that the virus had left behind in its wake. I have somehow not become infected yet. The virus had spared me and at the same time sentenced me to death in the loneliness of the stars. As this century ends and a new one starts, an entire era begins. A new era without humanity, an era in which all our settlements will begin to collapse into dust until there is no mark of us left in the universe. Sometimes I wonder, what if that's what had happened to all the other life? I returned to the planet that the virus had originated from and decided to spend the rest of my life there. Even after taking my spacesuit off and breathing in the sweet, fresh air, the virus won't infect me. I'm somehow the only one immune out of the trillions of people that succumb to this disease. Before I end my miserable existence, I've tasked my ship's AI to record and deliver this message on my ship's main hard drive. It will open a small wormhole and try to send this into the past, a technology that I have personally been working on myself ever since the whole human race went extinct. My ship's AI helped me greatly, and I was able to hopefully achieve what all of humanity hadn't yet: time travel. If you are hearing this message and the date is somewhere around the early 21st century, it means that my time-traveling wormhole succeeded and that I have long since died. Well, in your time, I don't even exist yet. Please, spread this message around as much as you can. Give it to everyone. Learn from our mistakes. Protect the planet. Take care of it. It is the only home we have in the deadly, inky black sea of stars. My eyes were brimmed with tears as I finished hearing the message. Deep down, I knew it was genuine. I told my boss I was joking with him and took the hard drive for myself. I'm sharing this message here before it's taken away and hidden. If it really is true, then it may be the only chance we have.
Grocery outlet, your extreme value headquarters, is tackling high prices so you can have a big game day win. Assorted 12 packs of Pepsi are only $2.99 each. No instant replay needed. That's extreme.
When I was 15, I had my first girlfriend. We lived in an upper-class area, very quiet and peaceful streets. My girlfriend Casey also lived 2 blocks away, so I could walk to her house almost nightly. One Thursday night during break, when I had nothing to do, I started my walk over to Casey's house. It was on the later side of the night, but I didn't really have a curfew, so it didn't matter. But pretty soon, I thought I could start hearing noises from around me. And when I say around me, I mean mostly behind me. The first time I heard it, it was the sound of a bush being shaken a bit. I only turned my head to look for a second without stopping. I just started to walk a little faster is all. When I got to the next block, I heard another noise, a twig or a small stick cracking. I stopped this time and turned around. All I saw was the empty street and the bushes that lined up along each property to separate the sidewalks from people's properties. Basically next to the street was a wall of bushes, and I didn't see anyone or anything that could be making these weird sounds. I picked up the pace even more, and I was reaching the home stretch to Casey's house. Of course, there was another sound again, this time more like footsteps. Quick, light footsteps. I turned again without stopping. No one, nothing. I could see Casey's house now. I called, and she picked up right away. I told her how freaked out I was getting because I kept hearing noises. I walked around the bushes surrounding her driveway and stepped onto her property. I noticed her staring out her bedroom window upstairs. She waved at me as she left on the phone, and I waved back. Then she asked me, "Who's that guy right behind you?" I turned right around and saw a fully grown man crouch walking maybe 10 feet in back of me. I screamed and ran for the door and started pounding on it. The man grabbed me and tried to put me in some kind of headlock, but he let go and ran away pretty quickly. Casey's mom opened the door with a look of dismay on her face. She let me in and slammed the door shut as Casey came running over. I was out of breath and felt like my heart was beating 1,000 beats a minute. Casey's mom hugged me, asked a few questions, then called the police to warn of a dangerous man going around town. Casey's mom let me stay over that night for obvious reasons, and she drove me home the next day. It was a dangerously stormy night. Everyone in my family was doing their own thing. I was in my room watching TV, my parents were in the living room watching some comedy show, and my sister was playing video games upstairs. I usually enjoyed stormy nights like this because it made me feel relaxed. I was relaxed until there was a monstrous bang on my window. I jumped up and looked outside. There was someone outside my window, but the large amount of rain pouring down the window kind of blurred his face. He started pounding at my window. It sounded like he was screaming for help. I opened the window just a crack, and he screamed in, "Let me in, I'm hurt." The rain was so loud I had to scream at him to come around front, then I shut my window. I ran outside to the living room to tell my dad that some man who seems to be in distress is screaming for help outside. And then came the knocks and shouts for help outside our front door. My dad was about to open the front door, but I stopped him. I said wait, because I wasn't sure if it was a good idea. Then the phone rang, and on the TV, it displayed the caller ID of our next door neighbor. My dad ran to pick it up. When I heard him say "no fucking way," I knew something was wrong. He hung up the phone and said stay away from the door. He didn't explain why. He just went to the window to peek at the front stoop. There is where he said he saw a guy crouched down, pounding on the door, holding some kind of large, sharp tool. My dad yelled through the front door at the man to go away before the cops get here. Then he actually got on the phone with the cops. Eventually the man outside gave up, and he disappeared the next time we checked. When my dad was on the phone with a neighbor, he told my dad that he saw some homeless-looking guy rummaging through his shed and came out with a large chopping axe. The cops found the crazed man wandering around the streets, and it made it in the newspaper a few days later. One night when I was a really young kid, I was in the living room watching my favorite cartoon. I had the TV pretty loud, but I thought I could hear my mom calling my name from downstairs. I called back, "What?" She didn't answer, so I guess she couldn't hear me. I heard her call me again, so I went down to the basement. The lights were off, so halfway down I called for my mom. She didn't answer. I didn't know where she could be calling me from, but one thing was for certain though. She wasn't in the basement. I started going back up the stairs, but before I even got to the top stair, I heard my mom's voice again from down in the basement calling my name. I looked down into the pitch blackness. I ran back up to the top step, turned on the lights, and walked halfway back down, peeking into the basement. I didn't see my mom anywhere down there. Suddenly, I got a huge rush of horror. I ran up the stairs basically crying for my mom. She came rushing down the stairs from upstairs, and I cried to her that something was calling me from downstairs that sounded just like her. She swore to me that she hadn't been calling me. She went down to the basement to check and make me feel better, but I didn't feel better. I'm sure she didn't believe me. Why would she? I was a little kid, but I still know that I heard what I heard. My grandpa recently told me a story. It was about a night he took his dog for a walk. He used to have a small Boston Terrier named Sherry, who he named after an old friend of his who passed away. My grandpa lives like 2 hours from us on a farm, and there's not much that goes on there. He lives with his wife Marianne, who he married like 15 years back. Every day, Marianne would take Sherry for a walk in the morning, and my grandpa would take her for a walk in the evening. on a regular walk during sunset. My grandpa was walking Sherry down the usual dirt path that ran along the woods next to their property. My grandpa passed by another person on the trail who Sherry instinctively barked and pulled towards like most dogs do when they see strangers. My grandpa said hello to the stranger, who had a large hood up, but the stranger just walked past without even batting an eye, so he and the dog kept walking. Sherry kept looking back every so often and barking, however. My grandpa would tell him to shush and yank at the leash to keep him walking. Eventually, my grandpa would turn around to look at what Sherry could be barking at. The stranger who passed him by a few minutes earlier was stalking him from behind a tree in the near distance. My grandpa decided to pick up the pace as fast as possible. At his old age, he always carries pepper spray in his big coat pocket just in case. He was getting closer to the house when suddenly he heard clicks from the leaves on the ground inches behind him. But before he could turn, he felt the warmth of a glove cover his mouth and nose, preventing him from screaming or breathing. My grandpa says he could hear Sherry barking and biting at the stranger, which might have helped in loosening the man's grip a little. My grandpa says he struggled to grab the pepper spray out from his pocket, but when he did, he sprayed it at least 10 times and continued spraying it even after the man who was holding him let go and started to scream. My grandpa came as close as he could to a run to escape back to his house. He was perfectly okay.
The $5 Big Breakfast Deal is back at Wawa. Get any Sizzly, any size hot or iced coffee, and a crispy.
I grew up in California for the first 14 years of my life. Our neighborhood wasn't the best, namely because it was an area that the Crips were known to reside in. If you don't know, the Crips are members of one of the biggest Los Angeles street gangs. My best friend, who I always called Stevie D, lived 2 doors down. We had other friends, of course, but we would often hang out just he and I. We'd usually ride our bikes together around town or play video games, just basic kid stuff. When we were 12, we were biking around the neighborhood one night and decided to visit a well-known abandoned house. It had been uninhabited for many years because no one would buy it for whatever reason. When we pulled up on our bikes to the front of the house, Stevie pointed to the window and said, "Look." I pushed my bike a little closer to the window and focused my vision on it. I could see someone peeking out the window. I couldn't tell if they were looking at us or not, but it was definitely a person's face sitting between the curtains. It was extremely strange considering the place had been unowned for years. We stared for longer than we should have, perhaps, and noticed something else that was strange. The person didn't move their face at all. We inched a little closer, onto the empty driveway actually. Upon getting closer, it appeared to be a Halloween decoration or something, like a fake head. This meant someone had snuck into the house to put it there. Stevie D and I, being the mischievous kids we used to be, hatched an idea to sneak in through the back somehow and check out the place. We hid our bikes on the side of the house behind an overgrown bush, then snuck into the yard. To our surprise, the back door was already unlocked, but when we came to think of it, it wasn't that surprising considering it seemed someone had already broken in to put that fake head there. We stepped into the house, but we didn't want to turn the lights on and expose the fact that we were in the house. It was dark in there, but not pitch black, so we could make our way through the house. We got to the living room first because we wanted to check out that fake head thing at the window. It smelled really bad in that room though. I picked up the head from the windowsill and immediately dropped it and screamed. I dropped it not because it was surprisingly heavy, but because it also felt like real skin. I saw a dark liquid pouring out from the bottom of the head that was now on the floor. It was blood. It was a real human head. There were 2 cracks in the ceiling above us. Stevie and I looked at each other with our mouths hanging open. We ran for the back door and got back on our bikes to get the hell out of there. Anyone in our immediate area learned pretty soon that the head belonged to a victim of the Crips, who apparently placed the head there as some kind of message. I don't think anyone knew the full story, but there was a good chance whoever placed that head there was still in the house, because Stevie and I both heard cracks in the ceiling above us, as if someone was coming downstairs. Last year, a The guy came to my house's door around 9 p.m. He knocked on the door, so I got my mom, and she went out to see who it was. By the way, we live in a rural area, so visits that late are extremely uncommon and strange. The guy talked to my mom about how he was opening a business, asked whether she liked American-made products, then handed her a Clorox container as a sample. He went back to his minivan and opened it to get a quote-unquote vacuum cleaner when my mom saw 5 other men sitting inside. She told me to run and get my phone since we don't have a landline. I couldn't find it, so I got my knife and stood around the corner. She threw the container outside and told them to get the hell off her property, as well as that she was calling the cops. They peeled out of the driveway, and we never saw the car again. I've always been an extreme sports person ever since I was little. Mountain climbing, parasailing, scuba diving, though I've always been an avid skier. I'd go upstate skiing at least 10 times a season, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. My friend, who I'll call Q, agreed to come upstate and go camping with me so we could do some backcountry skiing, which is basically skiing in the backcountry on unmarked or unpatrolled areas outside of a ski resort's boundaries. It was a 3-hour drive, then a decent amount of off-roading to get to where the hills were. I parked my truck at the bottom of a decent-looking area full of hills, but I also stopped there because I couldn't really drive out much further given that there were too many trees. Q and I then proceeded to unload the back of my truck of all our stuff, including ski gear and camping equipment. Then we hiked about a quarter mile, which was an incredible amount of work with all the stuff we were carrying. We found a perfect place to set up camp, right near the bottom of an uphill, and in a bit of a clearing between the trees. Setting up the tent and unloading our sleeping bags and equipment and such was first priority. When all of that was done, we started our hike up the hill to scout the area. We did a decent amount of hiking, but we also got a lot of skiing in. At one point, Q and I lost each other while skiing down a bigger hill. I assumed I'd meet him at the bottom, or just find him eventually. I checked the walkie-talkie just to see if he'd answer, but he didn't, which meant he was probably still going downhill. At some point while I was walking with my skis at the bottom of the hill, I ran into someone, another skier. He sounded very friendly under a ski mask, asking me where the best hills are and if we were camping and such. He had his skis strapped to his orange backpack. I pointed to the hill I just skied down and also pointed in the direction we set up camp. He said he and his wife were trying to find a good place to set up camp near other people and asked if I could lead him to my campsite. As much as I really didn't want to trek all the way back there, I felt I had to be a good Samaritan and help this man and his wife. I pulled out my walkie again and said into the speaker to Q that I was going back to the campsite for a bit. I started to lead the man who was behind me, when suddenly I started getting some static from another end on the walkie. It seemed someone, probably Q, was trying to talk to me, but the connection was shit. Nothing I could do about that except for come back to this hill afterwards. It took a decent amount of hiking and small talk with the man before we reached the campsite. I turned around to him and smiled under my ski mask, which I realized instantly was pointless. He sounded very thankful for he and his wife. Then I finally asked him, "Where is your wife?" He didn't answer. He started to walk closer to me. At first I thought nothing of it, but for some reason, something about his skis and backpack just struck me. They belonged to Q. For a split second I thought, is this Q? Is he pranking me? But it wasn't possible. The voice was too different from Q. The man was a few mere feet away from me at this point, and he was picking up the pace to a more intimidating approach. I panicked and jumped into the tent to dig for my flare gun in my bag. The man grabbed my leg, which was sticking out from the tent, and then I felt a sharp, intense tingle in my leg, like a severe electric shock, followed by a burning heat feeling. I screamed in pain as I just managed to pull out the flare gun, push aside the door to the vent, and aim it at the man. He immediately backed up with his hands in the air, and that's when I noticed the knife dug deep into my leg. I ordered the man to tell me where my friend was. He answered quickly, saying near the bottom of the hill he found me at. I told the man to stand still while I called 911 to request an immediate rescue. But the man took off quite easily while I was on the phone. There wasn't much I could do with one single flare gun shot. I felt like I was waiting there in the cold with my bleeding leg forever, until finally the reassuring sound of a rescue helicopter swooped overhead, and I shot my flare gun. I cannot believe I was actually picked up by a helicopter, in which I helped locate my friend laying in the snow in the middle of the hill. He was unconscious, and he had also been stabbed twice in the leg, then robbed. He tried talking to me through the walkie-talkie while he was losing consciousness, but the connection was bad. We both went to the hospital, but we're fine today. I lived in a small college town, and my apartment complex was walking distance from the bar/downtown area. One weekday night, I stepped out on our front porch to smoke a cigarette or two. I was up late studying. I brought my textbook with me and laid down on the stairs while I smoked. A girl who I had never met before, but who lived one apartment over on the ground floor, came home from downtown. She was by herself, and you could tell from her walk she had been drinking. She got in her apartment and barely got the door closed before some guy, who came out of nowhere, knocked on her door. She opened, and I noticed he introduced himself, which was weird because it was like 2:30 in the morning. Who comes to a random girl's apartment at that time? So I decided to stay outside and pay attention. They ended up talking for over 10 minutes. She later acknowledged how weird the situation was, but did not know how to end the conversation. He would do the creepiest things, like he reached up and stroked her hair at least 3 times, and he would try to slowly inch his way closer to her in the door. I made a point of being loud with my textbook so he would know I was there, and he disappeared as eerily as he came. We called the cops, and days later they had the girl and I sit with a sketch artist. As soon as the sketch was made public, floods of calls came in. The guy turned out to be a serial rapist who followed lone girls home from bars and pretended to be a cab offering them a ride. This girl just got lucky because she lived so close to the bars, he didn't get a chance to pull the cab routine. I've only used Craigslist once in my life, and the one time I used it, I got a very sour taste in my mouth. Here's why. The guy posted an ad for a ping pong table that I wanted to buy for my roommate and I. We set up a time for me to come pick it up that night. I had to remove the back seats from my truck so that I'd be able to fit the thing. I pulled up in front of the dude's house and texted him saying I'm here. I saw the door open, so I got out from my truck and did a quick speed walk to his front door to greet him. I went for the handshake, but I don't think he saw my arm, so after a few awkward seconds, I put my hand back down. He said in his deep smoker's voice to follow him to the basement. The whole house had a certain distinct smell to it. Not exactly a bad or concerning smell, just a cottony, smoky kind of smell. We got to the basement, and there was the ping pong table, right smack in the middle of the room. Suddenly he said, "Oh shoot, I gotta find the paddles." So he ran back up the stairs and told me to wait right there. I waited for a while down there, assuming he misplaced the paddles and was having a hard time finding them. I started to snoop around his basement a little bit, looking at his pictures and such. It was weird. He had framed pictures sitting on furniture, but they were all pictures of just him, no family members. There was one where he was at least with a dog, but that was pretty much it. I'd say 10 minutes went by and I was still stuck waiting down there, so I started to get even more snoopy. There was a back laundry/storage room in his basement that I started to observe for some reason. There was a drawer to his utility desk that was hanging half open. I pulled it fully open, and it revealed old Polaroid pictures. But these pictures were horrific and disturbing. They were all pictures taken of some girl who was tied to a chair and her mouth covered with tape. There were also yellow folders stacked in a row next to the photos. They were labeled A to Z. I didn't have it in me to open the folders and see what were inside. I took out my phone to take pictures of the contents of the drawer and planned to send it to my friends immediately, but I didn't have any service down there. It was definitely time to go. I ran back to the door at the top of the stairs, but my nightmare only became worse finding out the door was locked. As soon as I tried the doorknob though, I heard the deep, raspy voice of the man on the other side of the door. He was apologizing, saying the door was accidentally locked and he would go look for the key real quick. I didn't say a word in response. I examined the keyhole closely, ran back down the stairs to the man's utility desk, grabbed 3 screwdrivers of varying sizes, and tried each one in the keyhole for the door. The smallest screwdriver managed to fit in the rectangular-shaped keyhole, allowing me to turn it just enough to unlock and open the door. I didn't stop and look around. I simply ran out the door into my car. I didn't look back at the house. I simply drove to the nearest police station, showed them the pictures, gave them the address, told them where to find the photos, and that was enough for them to start their investigation. A few days later, I got all the information. The man was part of a child pornography trade on the deep web, which was how he made his living apparently. Why he decided to lock me in his basement, that's beyond me. I have not the slightest idea of what he intended on doing with me, but obviously it was not anything good. I used to babysit in my teenage years. When I was 14, I babysat for a 6-year-old boy named Cody once. His parents left me with few instructions other than to order a pizza for dinner and not let him go in their room. They also left me with an interesting comment, that Cody tends to act different than other kids and that he'll talk to himself or his imaginary friend, especially when he played with his toys. So, it was midday, pouring outside. I was watching some old Wipeout show that used to be on TV in the early 2000s. Cody was on the floor playing with his toys that were scattered across the living room. Cody kept using the name Agnes. He would act like he was playing with another kid who was sitting in front of him. One of his toys that were sitting across the room from him activated out of nowhere. I only found it weird because the toy was one of those little cube-like things with the crank where you pull it down and some simulated moving racing background came up on the screen. It was the kind of toy that would take effort to activate. And there it was, activated all by itself. I asked Cody how that was possible. He looked at me and said, "Agnes is playing with it." I have to admit, it was a little disturbing hearing him say that. I picked up the toy and turned it off. That night, in the final hour waiting for his parents to come back, I was in the bathroom washing up when there was a knock at the door. "Cody?" I said. I opened the door. Cody wasn't there. I looked into the hallway for Cody. One of the doors at the end of the hall started to creak open slowly, like really slowly. I turned off the lights of the bathroom and walked into the room expecting to see Cody playing around, trying to scare me. Instead, Cody was sitting on the bed in the far corner of the room, looking at me. I asked him who just pushed open the door. "Agnes," he said. Now truly freaked out, I went to pick Cody up off the bed and brought him to the living room, where I spent the rest of my shift until his parents came back. I didn't mention any of the weird things that happened, but when they reached out to me to watch Cody again a few weeks later, I never called them back. So I've actually got 2 stories that I think are worth hearing, and they're both related to each other. My name is David. I used to work late nights at a gas station / convenience store out in the middle of nowhere. This was forever ago, which I'm only mentioning because it was back before every establishment had state-of-the-art security systems and cameras covering every square inch of their property. It's not like security systems didn't exist, more so that it wasn't much of a priority. Plus, the owner was cheap. But anyway, I didn't care because the job was laughably easy. The most difficult part of working there was honestly the owner. He legitimately had the mind of a goldfish. We'd have the same 2 arguments multiple times a week, and it was almost like this guy forgot what we argued about every time, because he'd constantly repeat himself and bring up things we'd already addressed. But whatever. here's everything you need to know. Most nights, it was just me in there from 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning, and the place didn't see much traffic. That's about it. Anyway, one night, I'm pretty sure it was during the week, I was doing what I always did, leaning against the counter with a magazine in hand, trying to prevent the boredom from putting me to sleep. It was really late. I don't remember exactly what time it was, since the store had the remarkable ability to blend all the ungodly hours of the night into one lump of misery. But the store was dead silent. You know that faint buzzing noise those old fluorescent lights make? That was the only noise I'd hear in hours, and my brain had gotten numb to it, which I guess explains why I was so startled when the front door chimed. I looked up, and there was a man walking in. He was this tall, 30-something looking black guy with an above-average build. My first thought was ex-pro athlete, but then I looked at him a little more closely. Here's the thing, and I can't overstate how jarring this was. He was quite literally covered in blood, or I guess it could have been red paint, but I knew it wasn't. It was everywhere. There was a huge splatter across his chest for one, not to mention the streaks on his face and arms. It was a cartoonish amount of blood, which is why my brain took so long to process it. It was one of those unique sights that paralyzes your brain for a few moments because it doesn't fit any familiar category of lived experience.
I recently went to patient first when I wasn't feeling well. The doctor was so great, and I learned that I could see their doctor's schedule.
But what really got me were his eyes. They were just empty. I don't know how else to describe them. There was nothing behind them. It legit looked like he was just walking into the gas station at 2 a.m. on any other night. He looked perfectly normal, like he was relaxed and almost bored. It was like he didn't even know he was drenched in what was very clearly blood. I'm describing all of this in vivid detail so that my reaction makes sense. I don't want to come across as some pathetic loser. It was genuinely a terrifying situation. I was completely frozen, and all I could do was stare at the guy, which was probably the last thing I wanted to be doing. I couldn't help myself. Every time I was able to look away, my gaze immediately snapped right back to his eyes. He noticed, obviously, which wasn't too surprising. I mean, I was quite literally staring at him. I'm not sure what I was expecting him to do, but I definitely was not expecting him to smile at me. And then he said, calm as anything, "Don't worry, it's not my blood." As if that was supposed to make me feel any better. It didn't. My brain immediately started the emergency alarms, that this guy is a murderer. He might have just killed someone. He might kill me. Those were the only thoughts running through my brain, and I was freaking the fuck out. But then my survival instincts kicked in, and I started acting like everything was normal. I nodded at him like he had said something normal about the weather, and I buried my head back in the magazine. I watched him walk through the aisles like nothing was wrong. He grabbed some random stuff and came up to pay. I was actually kind of surprised that he wasn't going to just steal the items. I probably would have let him. I rang him up, careful not to look him in the eyes. The nightmare was almost over. He paid in cash, didn't say anything else, and left. The door chimed and he was gone, as simply as that. The second I heard a car engine start somewhere out in the parking lot, I grabbed the phone and called 911. I told them what I saw, and I tried to describe the guy as accurately as possible. I told them I didn't really know what had happened, but I was positive that something happened. The dispatcher was asking some clarifying questions when everything went sideways. I was mid-sentence when the door chimed again. Great, another customer. That was the last thing I wanted to deal with, but I was wrong. It wasn't another customer. It was him again, the guy I was in the middle of reporting to the police. He looked absolutely furious. I hung up the phone as fast as I could, but it was too late. He knew what I was doing. He must have seen me through the window. He stormed up to the counter and started demanding to know if I'd called the cops. I denied it, but he wasn't buying it. Not even a little. Things escalated quickly. He started cursing at me, telling me to mind my business and that he knew I was lying. I just put my hands up and didn't say anything, trying to defuse things as best I could, but there was nothing I could do. His voice was getting louder, and those empty eyes were suddenly filled with rage. At first, I thought he was just going to yell at me, but I saw it a second too late. He jumped across the counter and attacked me before I could do anything. I don't mean he climbed over it. I mean he launched himself across the counter and tackled me to the ground before I could even react. In all of 2 seconds, he went from screaming at me to strangling me, and I was fighting for my life. I thought I was gonna die. I had never been in a physical altercation before that night, and I was certain this guy was trying to end my life. I thrashed around wildly, kicking, scratching, biting even. I was just trying to survive. I could feel his blood, or whoever's blood it was, all over me, smearing my clothes and face. We were still rolling around on the floor when I resorted to my final option. I screamed that I had a gun, and I wasn't afraid to use it. A complete bluff, of course. Something about the way I said it must have been convincing, though, because he stopped punching me. He scrambled off and bolted for the door. I was still on the ground in a painful haze when I heard his car speed out of the parking lot. I didn't even get up at first. I just laid there for a while, covered in a mix of someone else's and my blood. The police showed up maybe 10 minutes later. When they saw the state I was in, they immediately left and tried to track the guy down. I never heard from them again. There was nothing about it on the news either, so I was completely in the dark. The experience was by far the scariest physical thing that has ever happened to me. Okay, if you thought that was crazy, I promise you this one's worse. A few months after the first incident, I was still working at the same gas station, which was probably my first mistake, considering what happened. But I needed the money. Also, there was a part of me that had convinced myself it was just a freak occurrence. A one-time thing that had no chance of ever happening again. But that's not the case. It was another late night when the next thing happened. Looking back, the circumstances surrounding the night were pretty much identical to that of the first incident. It was a late night, I was alone in the store, dying of boredom, etc. So anyway, this guy walks in the store and immediately catches my eye. The first strange thing I noticed was that he was wearing a suit, and not just any suit. This thing looked expensive.
Bosch wiper blades, engineered with advanced rubber formulations that deliver clarity, reliability, and long-lasting performance. Innovation recognizes innovation. The future is clear with Bosch wiper blades.
It was dark gray and perfectly tailored. He had no business being anywhere near a gas station past midnight dressed like that. My first thought was that he must be coming from a wedding, or maybe some kind of corporate event. I mean, there had to be some kind of explanation for what he was doing. But even important people don't walk into gas stations in the middle of nowhere wearing nice suits. That just doesn't really happen, and I would know. The guy didn't browse or even so much as glance at the aisles. He clearly wasn't hiding his intentions, or just didn't care enough to. Instead, he walked right up to me. He didn't speak or even look at me. He just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. At first, I was beyond confused, but then I looked down at the picture, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a picture of that guy who had come into the store with blood all over himself and tried to kill me. The photo wasn't 100% clear, but I was sure it was unmistakably the same person. I tried to mask my surprise, but I don't think I did a good job. I kept my face glued to the photo, but I could feel that man watching me. He didn't say anything at first, and when I looked up to meet his gaze, he just stared at me, like he was studying my face or reading my mind. I wasn't sure if he was expecting me to say something, so I didn't. It was painfully awkward, and then, after a really uncomfortably long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was surprisingly gruff, almost like he had just smoked a full pack of cigarettes. He asked me if I had ever seen that man before, and I immediately said I hadn't. It felt like the right answer, even if I couldn't explain it at the time. I just didn't want to get involved in any kind of illicit activity that was going on, and my gut was screaming, "Deny, deny, deny." The guy didn't respond. He just kept staring at me with these cold, calculating eyes that I couldn't read. It was really unnerving, especially given what he was asking me about. The silence was excruciating, and with every passing second, I lost confidence in the believability of my lie. Still though, I wasn't budging, and I was still pretty sure I had given a convincing answer. I won our little implicit standoff, and the guy finally reached down and picked up the photograph. As soon as he turned his back, I let out a huge sigh of relief, thinking everything was over. I watched him walk through the store toward the door, but right before he opened it, he stopped, and he turned back around to face me one more time. And then he just said, "I know you're lying." And then, before I could even respond, he was gone. I was pretty shocked by the whole encounter, more than I wanted to admit to myself. Being in that store all alone didn't feel safe anymore, and I didn't really know what to think. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out what the hell had just happened. Who was that guy? How did he know about the first incident? I wondered if he was a cop or a detective, or if he was something else entirely, someone connected to whatever that blood-covered man had been involved in. That's the thought that really freaked me out. I pretty quickly reasoned that if he had been someone official like a cop, he would have revealed his identity to me, which could only signify bad news. I didn't end up calling the police that time, partly because I wasn't sure what I'd even say, and partly because of the PTSD over what happened the last time I called the police. Nothing happened for a while after that night, though. I was a little shaken, yeah, and part of me was expecting something else to happen that night, but nothing did. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I started thinking something might have actually been wrong. I started noticing the same silver SUV in various spots throughout my day. At first, it was parked across the street from the gas station during my daytime shifts, which was normal enough, but then I noticed it in the parking lot of the grocery store I went to, which was a touch stranger. Once I saw it on my street, the alarm bells started to go off again. I'm not a paranoid person by nature, but when you see the same vehicle in several different locations over the course of 2 weeks, you start to wonder. I had a feeling I knew who it was, and I told myself the next time I saw the car, I would call the police and report it as discreetly as possible. I knew it was that guy who had walked into the store that night in a suit. It had to be him. The worst part about it all was not knowing how he'd figured out where I lived. Somehow he tracked me down. You have to remember, I lived alone at the time. It's not like I had protection at home or a lot of people to consult on this. I don't know why, but I convinced myself things would blow over if I just ignored it. And of course, that was an awful way to proceed. About 3 weeks after he'd first shown up, I was jerked awake in the middle of the night by the sound of glass shattering. My first reaction wasn't to freeze or flee, but to fight. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and ran into the living room. There was no one there, which I was able to determine in just a few minutes because the house was pretty small. There was something, though. There, sitting in the middle of the living room floor, surrounded by broken glass, was a rock. Just a plain rock, maybe the size of a fist. There was no note attached to it, but I understood what it meant. In that moment, I realized I couldn't do this anymore. That guy had clearly been stalking me, and he was clearly involved in something awful and was trying to tell me something. I didn't know what that thing was, but I knew I wanted no part of it, so I caved. I quit my job the next day and started looking for other places to live. It took me a little over a month to find a nondescript apartment a few towns over, and I figured that was good enough. In that moment, I didn't see the SUV one time, but my mind was made up, and nothing happened after that. I was finally at peace, and I was actually able to find another job relatively easily. I ended up moving again not even a year later, this time way out of state, and that was that. But I still think about both experiences from time to time. Even though the first encounter was probably more life-threatening, it's the second one that gets me. I was never able to figure out why someone would go through all that trouble, stalking, harassment, intimidation, just because I'd called the cops on someone covered in blood. The only explanation I could think of was that he somehow thought I had a connection to that first guy, and I was harboring him or sheltering him or something. It's been years, and I've accepted that I'll probably never figure out the truth behind any of what happened. This happened about 8 months ago. The night in question, I was heading back from a job site about 3 hours from my house. I was beat. The job had taken longer than expected, and I didn't have the amount of caffeine in my system such exhausting work required. By the time I got back on the road, it was already past 10. I know a 3-hour drive doesn't sound too intense, but I had been working so hard that even the simple task of keeping my eyes open was a chore. Plus, my truck is several years old. I don't drive a fancy vehicle with assisted driving or anything like that, so it's not like I had the comfort of knowing my car would help with the drive. About 45 minutes in, I knew I needed to stop. My eyelids were doing that thing where they just kind of drift down on their own, and I was having to physically shake my head to stay alert. So I pulled into the next gas station off the highway. It was around 11 at that point. I filled up my tank, smoked a cigarette, and kind of stood there debating what to do. I still had over 2 hours of driving ahead of me, and I knew there was no way I'd make it. So I made the decision to take a quick nap and finish the drive afterward. I drove to the corner of the parking lot and turned my engine off. I was just going to go to sleep for a few hours right there. I've slept in worse places, it didn't seem like a big deal. I was out almost instantly. When my alarm went off, it felt like I had blinked and an hour had passed. I still wasn't fully rested, but I was definitely more alert than before, which was good enough for me. The lot was completely empty now. There had been at least 2 other cars there when I pulled in, and they were both gone. Without as much as a second thought, I started my truck and pulled back onto the highway. Things were fine for maybe the first 20 minutes. The highway was dead, and I was kind of zoning out. Not falling asleep per se, but just letting muscle memory take over. I was essentially on autopilot. At one point, I realized my truck was making some strange noises. It actually took my brain a few minutes to process what I was hearing as abnormal. That's how zoned out I was. I turned the AC down so I could hear things more clearly. There was this faint thumping sound coming from somewhere behind me. I turned around a few times, but didn't see any loose items bouncing around in the back seat or anything like that. I figured it was just something shifting around in the truck bed. One of my tools, maybe. Beyond speculating, there wasn't much else I could do. The situation didn't really warrant me pulling over, so I made a mental note to check it when I got back home, and I kept driving. The sounds continued, though. It actually started to bother me, and I ended up cranking the radio to drown it out. At one point, I slammed my hand against the hood of the truck and cursed out of frustration. Strangely, that seemed to work. For maybe 10 minutes after that, things were quiet. I was relieved, not because the noise was worrying me, but because it was genuinely ticking me off. The adrenaline from getting so worked up had woken me up a bit more, which was a good thing. But that increased alertness also cleared some of the brain fog, and I started thinking about how odd it was for a sound being made by an inanimate object to stop so abruptly as a result of my outburst. I had already eliminated the possibility that a faulty part in my truck had been making the sound, so the fact that slapping the hood could have caused it to stop was such a weird coincidence. I was in my head about it, debating whether I should stop or not, when out of nowhere, I heard a deafening crack come from directly behind me. It was not a normal sound, and it definitely wasn't a normal crack either. It was more like a crash, like someone had thrown a rock against one of my windows. The next 30 seconds were pure chaos and terror. I turned around in shock, and what I saw nearly made me lose control of my vehicle. There was a person standing in my truck bed, banging on the glass divider between the truck bed and the back seat with one of my tools. It was dark, but I could clearly see him. He was banging on the glass repeatedly, like a wild animal trying to claw its way out of a cage. The way he was moving was truly barbaric. I can't overstate that enough. I swerved uncontrollably, partly out of fear and partly to try and shake him off. I lost control of the truck and started spinning out of control. I genuinely thought I was going to flip, but all I could think about was the maniac who was trying to smash his way through the glass. I somehow managed to wrestle the truck back under control, and I skidded to a halt halfway between the right lane and the shoulder. I was too disoriented and terrified to think about how lucky I had been to avoid a wreck. And the moment my head stopped spinning, I ripped off my seatbelt. I don't know what came over me. I'm not the bravest person, and I wasn't armed, but I knew I wanted to do something. I couldn't just sit there. I had to confront the psycho in the truck bed, if he was even still there. I threw the door open and ran around the truck. As I was approaching the truck bed, I saw a man in a hoodie climbing out. He jumped onto the ground and started running for the tree line off the side of the highway. I chased him for a few seconds before realizing that was a terrible decision. It was pitch black out there. I had no idea if he was armed, and we were completely alone. Wherever my bout of confidence had come from, it didn't last. In a matter of seconds, I was terrified all over again. I ran back to my truck and sped off without even looking back to see where that guy went. I drove for a little while and then pulled over again to inspect the damage to my truck. My brain was genuinely in shock. I couldn't think straight, and I started to feel what I can only describe as a panic attack. I calmed myself down and got out of the truck. The glass divider was destroyed. It wasn't completely shattered, but there were so many cracks in it that one more forceful impact would have taken it out. I climbed into the bed of my truck to see what he had been hitting the glass with, but something caught my attention before I could even figure it out. There was a foreign object in there that I didn't recognize. It definitely wasn't a tool. It took me a few seconds to realize what I was looking at. It was a trash bag. It was wrapped over on itself multiple times, like someone had been trying to keep it really secure. And it was small too, like the size of 2 fists. It looked wet, and as I crouched down to get a better look, I realized it smelled disgusting. It smelled rancid, like rotting meat or food. I didn't want to touch it, but I needed it out of my truck. I needed to be as far away from that bag as possible. So as gingerly as I could, I grabbed it and quickly chucked it toward the tree line. I didn't give things another thought. I immediately got back in the driver's seat and started driving away. As I was pulling out, I looked down at my hands and realized they were tinted slightly red. The bag had been coated in something red that was now all over my hands. It was sickening, but there was nothing I could do besides drive. I rubbed my hands on my jeans and tried to just make it home without going insane. I ended up keeping the incident to myself. I didn't involve the police, and it wasn't until weeks later that I even told my friends about what happened. I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter for days afterwards. I got a friend of mine to fix my glass a few days later without asking questions, and that was pretty much that. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't affected by what happened. Looking back, the only explanation that makes sense is that he climbed into the bed of my truck while I was asleep at the gas station, which makes sense because I don't have a bed cover. But he must have been lying completely flat there for most of the drive too, otherwise I would have seen him. I've never been in a life or death situation like that before. It was by far the most terrifying thing I've ever gone through.
This was during my summer break when I was 21 years old and in college. It was my first break since starting college that I actually decided to stay in state rather than going back home to live with my parents for the 3 months out of school. A good friend of mine had a place near campus with a spare room and offered to let me rent it for insanely cheap. As far as jobs go, I tried out something new every few months because my scheduling with school was always pretty hectic. But during this break and for a few months prior, I had been house sitting. There were a few websites and apps that you could easily sign up for, and really the job was simple and didn't feel much like a job. Most people needing house sitters had huge, expensive houses, sometimes with pets or plants that they wanted me to take care of while they were away. And in return, not only did I get paid, but also could live in their super nice luxury house for a few days or even weeks. I got this specific house just a couple days into summer break. I went and met the owners a day before they left to get instructions and a list of things to do while they were gone. It was a really nice couple in their 30s, and right off the bat, when I pulled up to the house, I was a little confused. It was a small, older, unassuming home, sort of in the plains on the edge of town. Not the typical customers in need of house sitting, and they were only going to be gone for 4 days. At first, I thought it was easy money. It wasn't until toward the end of our meeting that I figured out really why they wanted a house sitter. The couple mentioned that during the day, all I needed to do was water their plants and make sure the house didn't burn down, but to be a little more cautious at night. They said some people had been coming by recently that they didn't know, and while they didn't have anything strange happen with them, they just wanted to be safe and have someone watch the house while they were away. As they were telling me this, they continually interrupted themselves, saying they were sure it was nothing at all, and that they were overreacting, and played it down to be nothing to worry about. And I guess it worked, because I actually didn't even process how strange it was until the next day when I arrived at the home after they had left. Being out on the plains in an older home felt very isolating and uncomfortable. I wasn't used to it at all. Every direction I looked out the windows, it was just tall grass with the tree line far back and nearly invisible when it was dark out. And the sound, or lack of sound, is what really felt unsettling. It was dead silent outside, which made every noise in the house seem even louder. The creaky floors and walls, and just everything about it, was creepy to me. Part of me wanted to leave, feeling like some information was left out about what this place really was, or why they hired me to begin with. But after that first night went by without any problems, I figured I was just in my head too much. I made breakfast and did some chores around the house, then sat outside on the porch for a while. The owners texted me asking how everything was going. I said everything was good. I will say, sitting out there alone felt nice now that the strange feelings had passed. It was just quiet and relaxing. The grass blowing in the wind and the birds flying around. Not stuff I see or hear very often living near the campus in the city. Once the sun fell, I headed in to watch TV and chill for the night. It was sometime around 8 when I stood up from the couch just to stretch and take a minute. I went over to the window, casually pushing the curtain aside and looking out of the backyard. But someone was out there, standing right in the field. I was more confused than anything, and just stared at them. He was definitely looking at the house, which, as more time passed, made me more uncomfortable, so I closed the curtain. Was this what the owners were talking about? The more I thought about it, the more insanely creepy it was. Way out here on the outskirts, some random guy watching this old house. Something wasn't right. I looked back out. The man was still there, but the longer I looked, I realized he wasn't alone. There were others, maybe 3 or 4. It was hard to make out whether some of them were figures or just shadows from the tall grass. I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing, if not for the owners having mentioned something like this. I immediately texted them, saying there were a bunch of people watching the house outside, and the reply I got wasn't what I was expecting. They reassured me the people wouldn't do anything, that they never had done anything, and to just ignore them. But they also said if I was really nervous about it, then I could call the cops. I didn't know what to do. This was their house, and I'd never called 911 before, or been in any situation like this. So I trusted the owners that it was okay. I know now just how weird this was, and didn't realize how the owners were almost manipulating me into not calling the cops, or being worried about it. I should have known how odd it was that they were so sure about the people being harmless, despite supposedly never having had any interaction with them. I went to look out the window again. All of them were gone now. No one was in the field of grass or by the tree line. It was empty out there. I stayed on edge though, checking the windows for a couple of hours. It had to be 1 a.m. at least. I didn't feel in danger anymore, but also not safe either. The thought of sleeping felt impossible, though my eyes were getting heavy. I couldn't stop thinking about those people eerily watching the house from out in the field. It made no sense to me. I got up from the couch to get another glass of water to keep myself busy, and as I moved into the hallway, I heard a slight creak above me. I stopped walking and heard it again. I looked up at the ceiling. There was no upstairs in this house. Slow, heavy thumps moved across the roof, stopping when they got just above the front door. I jolted back and froze. I stared down the hallway at the door. They knocked again. I started to slowly back up, my footsteps creaking on the wooden floor as I tried to get back to the bedroom and lock myself in. But before I made it, my phone started ringing. It was the owners calling me. I hesitated before answering. He said in almost a disturbingly calm voice that everything was okay, but that I needed to walk out of the house and leave. I told him the people were out there, at the door right now. There was a pause. Then he repeated himself, telling me to walk out and leave, that the people weren't going to do anything to me. I was in shock. I could tell in his voice that he already knew. He knew that they were out there right now. The person outside was still knocking, much harder now, like he was getting impatient. And I could hear multiple others moving in the grass around the house. I knew I was running out of time, and my only choice really was to listen to the owner and leave, hoping he was telling the truth. I walked over to the door. When I got up to it, the knocking stopped. I opened the door. There were two older men there, both looking rugged and with straight, emotionless faces. Footsteps were walking through the grass somewhere to the side of the house. Otherwise, it was dead silent. I was horrified, shaking as I slowly stepped outside. They just watched me, not saying a word, as I walked past them and got into my car, leaving the property. Once I was safe, I called the owner's number back to ask them what the hell just happened, but the call didn't go through. He had blocked me. And against my best judgment at the time, I didn't call the police. I took so long on deciding, feeling weird about calling the cops to someone else's house when he didn't ask me to, and overall just feeling like it was out of my place and up to the owners to deal with whatever was going on, because clearly they didn't want me to know anything. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't listen and stayed inside. I know the group of people would have likely broken in, and I'm not sure if they would have let me go had it come to that. It's been almost a whole decade since this happened, and I still think about it from time to time, but never had come to any conclusions on what was really going on at that house.
You're 10 minutes late for work, but you were 20 minutes late yesterday. It's a good day for a good deal at Outback Steakhouse.
I work for the city as a type of general contractor for regular work that needs to be done around town. A lot of the kind of stuff I do is seasonal work, and this happened during winter, so a good portion of my shifts were driving the snowplow to clear all the roads. Even on the days it didn't snow, I'd be salting the roads or plowing the leftover snow that we didn't get to the days before. I always volunteered to switch over my shifts to night shifts around this time of year because it was way calmer and peaceful to plow the roads when it was dark and empty. This night, I clocked in at the warehouse at 10 p.m. There was a massive snowstorm coming through the town that had started a few hours ago. I quickly checked which sections of town I was assigned, then got the keys and hopped in the plow truck. Even the roads that I could tell had already been plowed were starting to get bad again, and the heavy snowfall made it really hard to see. Luckily, no one else seemed to be out on the roads. I made my way about 20 minutes down to the southeast part of town that I was assigned to plow. I had been doing this for years, so I knew all the sections like the back of my hand. This area was the older part of town, the neighborhoods that had been there for who knows how long. Some of the houses had been rebuilt or heavily renovated because so many people nowadays move there just for the land the houses sit on. It was much more quiet and spread out there. Only downside, at least for my job, was that the roads were thin. I'd call them 1.5-lane roads, wider than a single-lane one-way road, but not wide enough for two cars to pass by each other without slowing down first. So obviously bringing the snowplow through there can be a bit difficult. At night, I usually didn't have to worry too much about it though. Anyway, when I got to the neighborhood, I began circling in and out of the streets, pushing the snow off the road. A big, spread out neighborhood like this takes a while. I was probably in the front of the neighborhood for almost 2 hours. I think I remember seeing it was close to 1 a.m. when I finished up and started making my way further in toward the back of the neighborhood. And that's when I pulled up behind a car. Nearly had to slam on the brakes, because in the storm I couldn't see them until they were just 30 feet ahead of me. It was some old beat-up dark red car, stopped right in the middle of the road. No way to get around this guy, even with a normal car. I waited a while, and the car didn't flash its hazards or move at all, so I thought he might have been stuck. I put the plow in park and hopped out, walking through the deep snow-covered street and up to the car. Just as I got a few feet away, the driver's side door swung open, and a man stepped out. As I started asking if he was stuck and needed help getting out, I noticed he looked really disturbing, not like anyone I'd seen before. He was very thin, his hair was disheveled, and his face looked exhausted, yet his eyes stayed wide open, like he hadn't slept in days but was hopped up on caffeine. I switched my question over to, "Are you okay?" This guy did not look well at all. I took a couple steps closer to try and help, but he mumbled something under his breath. Couldn't hear it through the harsh winds. I said what, and he mumbled again. The man just said, "Leave." I said I was just trying to make sure he was okay, and this time he nearly yelled, "Leave." So I backed up, and by the time I'd gotten back into my plow truck, he had driven off. I didn't know what the hell was wrong with that guy, but I knew there was something wrong. I stayed parked there for a minute, debating on calling the cops just because of how strange it all was. But I didn't get his tag, so I thought it wouldn't be useful anyway. Besides, he was probably just having a really bad night or something. I continued plowing the streets. Went another 30 minutes not seeing anyone at all. Even the snow that was on the streets didn't have very many tire tracks going through them. It looked like everyone had stayed in tonight to weather out the snowstorm. I was back to just going through the motions at this point, plowing the calm roads and wondering when the snow would stop falling, when I had to hit my brakes again. It was that same car, the old red one, stopped right in the middle of the street. This was a different spot from before though. I looked around, and there was only one house on this part of the road. After 30 seconds of waiting, I tapped on the horn, but got nothing in return. He stayed parked right there in the road. This time, I decided it was too strange and got on the line with the police to report this really unusual behavior. The license plate was covered in snow, or maybe just by the blizzard, I couldn't tell, so I got out to get a closer look. Pretty much just when I did, I saw through his windows that the car was empty. No one was in there. I kept the operator updated that I didn't know where the guy was, but then I heard something. A scream, faintly cutting through the wind. It came from the house right off the road. I took a few steps closer, unsure if I'd heard it correctly, and that's when I heard it again, and saw that the front door was wide open. I sort of put the pieces together of the man being gone and the house being open, and knew something horrible was going on. I called out as I started running through the deep snow to get up to the front door. I told the operator everything that was going on, and of course they told me to wait in the truck for an officer to get there. I didn't listen. I went up to the front door, and the inside of the house was dark, aside from a hallway light glowing from upstairs, and I could hear the horrifying screams of a woman calling for help, muffled by the sounds of someone slamming their body into the bedroom door. I hurried up the staircase and found the disturbing-looking guy trying to break down the door, slamming his shoulder into it, kicking it, and doing everything he could to get it open. He didn't even turn to look at me or stop when I approached him. It wasn't until I pulled him away that he started fighting back. I was able to get control of him, enough to keep him away from the door. The guy was completely losing it, and I hadn't noticed until I managed to pin him to the ground that there was a knife on the floor at the other end of the hallway. I think in the struggle, he had tried to grab it from his pocket at some point and lost control of it before he could do anything. I knew the moment I saw it that I had gotten really lucky. A few minutes later, he ran out of energy and couldn't fight much more, and when police arrived, they cuffed him and brought him in. Now, I think most of what happened is pretty easy to put together, but I still feel like I didn't get a lot of specifics from the officers in the weeks afterward. All I know is the house he broke into was his ex-wife's house, where I guess he also used to live. Probably lost it in the divorce and lost his mind as well. That's all the details I managed to get. I still feel slightly guilty for not calling the police the first time I saw him, because I did have a bad feeling about him. I just didn't think it could have possibly been that bad. Thankfully, everyone managed to be okay afterward, though. Recently, I picked up a job doing overnight deliveries. There's a few companies that hire people to do this, and having been an Uber driver for the last several years, I thought this would be a good change. The official title of this kind of job is flex drivers, meaning you use your own car and deliver stuff on a flexible schedule. I always did overnights for the extra pay and the ease of the work. 99% of what I did was picking up Amazon packages and delivering it to houses throughout the town. I think because it was sort of a new thing, it was never really well planned in the system. Like, all the deliveries were often far from each other. On this night, I had started late, around 11ish, and went straight to the warehouse to get my packages, then started heading to the delivery locations. First few went well, nothing special to note, but my next delivery was really far out, about 40 minutes from the previous one, which I'm getting paid for it, so it doesn't matter. But still, a long drive is a long drive just for a single delivery. I made my way all the way out there, passing through the shady part of town that I wasn't too familiar with. I saw on the label that it had a unit number on the address, which is a telltale sign that it's going to be an apartment complex. Often there's package rooms to leave them in, or special directions of some kind that somehow always caused issues, like not being able to access the package room, or not being able to find the right unit. When I pulled up to the address, I knew it was going to have one of these issues. The building was old and looked like it should have been torn down years ago, but a few apartment lights were on in the windows. It was very still outside. I didn't see anyone around. I got the package and stepped out, walking around the building to the package room. But of course the door was locked, and there was no code on the order. So I walked back around to the main entrance to the apartment building, but the lobby was locked as well. In cases like these, I just drop it off outside the door. However, in the 30 seconds I was out there, a man came up to me. He was tall, with a thick winter jacket on, and looked maybe 50-ish with a gray beard. At first, he just walked up and said, "How's it going?" So I nodded and moved aside, assuming he was trying to get into the building. But the man stopped right next to me and just stood there for a second. I said sorry and stepped further back, saying he could go in and that I was just dropping off a package. The man said no worries and asked how my night was going, still standing in the same spot. That's when I realized he was actually trying to talk to me and start a conversation, which was pretty weird given we were alone out there at like 2 in the morning. I confusedly said my night was alright, and I was just doing some deliveries, making up that I was running behind and had to go. I started walking back to my car, but heard him start asking about my job, like he didn't hear that I just said I had to go. I heard him take a couple steps behind me before I got in my car and pulled away, leaving the parking lot. I didn't know what that was, but knowing that I was in a shady area of town had me a little more worried about it. At least I got away, though. I pulled over a few minutes down the road to situate the other packages and figure out what was next. I found one of them that was 15 minutes from me. I put my blinker on to get back onto the road, seeing a car coming up in my mirror and waiting for them to pass so I could merge back in. But the car started slowing down, until I realized it was pulling off to the shoulder right behind me. I didn't bother staying and just got back onto the road and continued to the next address. Thought it had to be a coincidence, just some strange night I was having. I drove the 15 minutes, getting to the house. It was a regular home in a very typical neighborhood. I made sure I had the right box, then headed up the driveway and up to the door. And not 20 seconds later, I saw a light coming from down the road. I turned and glanced over my shoulder, seeing a car driving slowly along the street. And when it stopped right behind mine, my whole body went cold. I didn't ever get a good view of the car that tried to stop behind me before, but this was too much to be a coincidence. I was sure it had to be the same car from 15 minutes ago. And somehow, even then, I had never connected that it could have been the guy from the apartment complex. It seemed so impossible. But when I saw him looking at me through the window, I knew I needed to get out of there right away. I sprinted for my car. The man saw me running and pulled his car around, blocking the front of mine, and he got out just as I got in. His friendly, albeit creepy, face from before was gone. He looked pissed off. He ran up to my window and started punching it. I backed up to go around him, but he ran right in front of my car. The guy was screaming too. Nothing sensible though. It almost didn't even sound like English, just a mesh of random words that meant nothing. I started backing up more until I was far enough that he ran back to get in his car. Then I sped past him. I knew he'd follow, so I called 911 and desperately asked for help. An officer was nearby, so they told me to just keep driving and updating them on where I was. At some point, I don't know if it was a minute or two after driving, I noticed the man behind me wasn't there anymore. I met up with an officer soon after that, and to be perfectly honest, I thought this was going to be a case where we never found out who he was. But I guess the guy was pretty stupid. He ordered the package that I delivered to the apartment complex, using a random fake address of one of the units, but still using his real name. They even found him the next day hanging around the complex still, and actually waiting on a different package, presumably to try again whatever it was he was doing. When they questioned him, he was described as a psychotic person that had no real reason for anything he was doing. And while that answer didn't satisfy me, that was that. It's scary knowing how quickly and randomly you can run into someone that has horrible intentions without even having motives. I think if I didn't get away, there would have been nothing I could do to stop him from doing whatever it was he was intending.
This happened to me on Highway 20 in rural Georgia. I'd driven that road 100 times without thinking about it. I'm a substitute teacher. My brain is trained to stay calm when things get loud. You manage the situation and keep moving. That night in October 2022, I learned how fast that kind of calm can disappear. I'd had one of those long, exhausting days. Kids talking over each other, repeating directions, asking questions they already knew the answer to. By the time I was released, my head was still stuck in teacher mode, replaying what I'd do differently the next day. I remember thinking about rewriting a worksheet when I got home. That's what was in my head when it happened. A loud crack exploded through the car. The windshield didn't collapse. It spidered. White fractures burst across the passenger side, spreading so fast my eyes couldn't track them. The car jolted, and for a second the road looked like it had been drawn in broken lines. I was alone. My phone was at 12%. The heater was barely doing its job. My first instinct was to brake and pull over. My second instinct, stronger, said don't. The object didn't come from above like a kicked up rock. It came from the side, from the shoulder. I flipped on my hazards and slowed instead, trying to stay in control without committing to a stop. The fractured windshield vibrated and flashed under my headlights. I leaned forward to see through the clearest patch. Right then, I saw movement at the tree line. A shape where there shouldn't be one. A body-sized outline that didn't move like an animal. I kept rolling. Then two shapes broke from the woods and ran, running straight toward the road. My mouth went dry immediately. And then I saw a third shape closer to the pavement, already positioned like it didn't need to rush. I remember whispering, no, 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 like saying it might interrupt whatever was happening. My brain tried to argue with itself. Maybe they need help. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe, but the way they moved shut that down. It felt planned. That's when it hit me. Stopping was the trap. If I pulled over fully, I'd be a cracked windshield car on a narrow shoulder with trees tight on one side and darkness on the other. No room to maneuver, no witnesses, no clean escape. I scanned ahead, searching for headlights or a driveway. Instead, I noticed something behind me. Farther back along the shoulder, barely visible, was another vehicle. No lights, parked too neatly to be broken down. I wouldn't have noticed it if the windshield hadn't been fractured into 100 reflective lines. My body locked up in that way that comes with realization. The runners were almost at the road now. The third shape moved toward my passenger side. I hit the horn. The sound echoed into the trees. They didn't react. That told me everything. I pressed the gas. Not flooring it, I still needed to see, but enough to commit forward. The road warped through the cracked glass, and I locked my eyes on the lane line like it was the only thing holding reality together. As I passed, the closest figure lunged toward the passenger door. I saw a pale flash of an arm. A hand yanked the door handle. The car shook from it, and I felt that awful sense of being touched through the machine around me, like the boundary had been crossed anyway. Another figure slapped the hood hard, trying to force a panic stop, trying to make me do something sudden. I screamed, but I stayed on the gas. The windshield vibrated under the pressure. Every bump made the cracks chatter. I kept thinking, if it gives out, I can't stop anyway. In the mirror, I saw them stop running. I think it's because they expected me to stop. I didn't slow until I hit the familiar gas station exit. I took it too fast, tires chirping, heart still racing. The station lights hit me like a stage. Cars, a man walking out with a soda, a truck idling. I pulled into the brightest spot and locked my doors again, even though they were already locked. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled dialing 911. When the dispatcher answered, I tried to sound calm. I gave the location, described the cracked windshield, the figures running from the woods. She asked gently, "Did you see their faces?" I realized I hadn't. I saw movement. I saw arms. I saw intent, but no faces. Then I realized how anonymous it all felt, like it could happen again to anyone. A deputy showed up later. He looked at my windshield, took notes, drove the stretch. They didn't find anyone, nor the vehicle. Nothing to blame. I went home anyway, because I didn't know what else to do. But the sound of that windshield shattering still echoes clearly in my head. My name's Mark. I'm 34. I work as a warehouse supervisor, and this happened to me on Route 17 in upstate New York. I'm not the type who stops for strangers or jumps to worst-case scenarios. I've driven those roads my whole life, late nights included, and nothing about that stretch ever felt dangerous to me before. That night changed the way I handle roadside help. Late November 2021, cutting through the rural part of New York. Route 17 can go long stretches without traffic, so when someone shows up behind you, you clock it, then forget it. But this one didn't pass me, and it didn't back off. It just stayed put in the mirror. Then the brights flashed once. Just a quick burst, like a tap on the shoulder. I checked my dash. No warning lights. The truck sounded fine, but it was a company pickup. Older, temperamental. I thought it was probably something small and looked for a safe spot. There's a wide gravel shoulder I know on that stretch. Enough room to pull off without being half in the lane. I signaled, rolled in, hazards on. I hadn't even unbuckled when the car behind me pulled in too. Most people flash brights to warn you and keep going. They don't follow you into a pull-off like they're part of the plan. The driver got out fast. He walked straight toward my truck. Trees lined both sides of the road, tall and black, swallowing sound. No traffic, no nearby lights. He stopped at my driver window and pointed toward the back of my truck. "Your back tire looks weird," he said. Normal voice. Calm, like a guy doing me a favor. Then, roll the window down. "I can't hear you." I cracked it maybe an inch. "What do you mean weird?" I asked. He leaned closer instead of answering. "Roll it down more," he said. "I'm trying to help you." "I can hear you fine," I said. "Just tell me what you saw." He didn't. His eyes moved instead. Door handle. Dash. passenger seat, everything but the tire. Step back from the window, I said, clear and firm. He smiled like he'd expected that. Relax, he said, lifting one hand. The other stayed low, out of sight. I'm not here to mess with you. Your tire looked like it was wobbling. I'll check it myself, I said. Step back. Normal people step back when you tell them to. Even if they think you're being paranoid, they give space because there's no reason not to. He didn't move. Man, he said, I'm just trying to keep you safe. Why are you acting like that? That's when the situation changed. He wasn't worried about my truck anymore. He was worried about me noticing him. I've seen that tactic before. Push a boundary, then make the other person feel unreasonable for reacting. Suddenly, you're defending yourself instead of watching them. Step back, I said again. He laughed a little, but his feet stayed planted. Okay, he said, but didn't move. His hands never showed at the same time. One would rise while the other dropped. His body turned toward my door, not toward the rear tire. I looked past him at the road. It was empty. Then at his car. The headlights were still on and aimed right at us. I couldn't see inside. You should check it now, he said. Driving on a bad tire is dangerous. Dangerous. Safe. Help. He kept saying those words like they were leverage. I'm going to the next exit, I said. There's light there. His eyes moved straight to the window gap. No, he said. You should check it now. He leaned in again, closer than before. Just roll it down, he said. I can't hear you. He'd heard me every time. Then he reached toward the gap like he was testing whether I'd let him widen it. I locked eyes with him. Back. Up. Now. He paused, then smiled wider, like this moment was the point. He didn't step back. That's when I stopped treating it like a conversation. I put the truck in gear and pulled out smoothly. No tire spin and no panic. I didn't want chase energy. As I passed him, he took a half step forward, like he might grab the handle. Then he stopped. In my mirror, he didn't run back to his car. He walked, slow and calm, like he had options. I drove until I hit a gas station with real light and other people. I checked every tire like I was inspecting a plane. Nothing was wrong. No bulge, no wobble, no leak. I stood there for a long time, staring back toward the road. A few days later, someone posted in a local Route 17 group. A warning. A guy flagging drivers down, saying their tire looked wrong, asking them to roll the window down. Reading that locked everything into place. It wasn't random. My name's Lauren. I was 22 at the time, a college student driving back to campus on Highway 101 in Northern California. It was January 2023, late, foggy, and I remember thinking how quiet everything felt, like the road had been erased except for the headlights in front of me. When the truck behind me started flashing its brights, I honestly thought it was doing me a favor. Maybe I was drifting. Maybe something was wrong with my lights. I'd rather feel embarrassed than cause an accident. That was my mindset that night. Be responsible, get back to campus, don't do anything reckless. I kept thinking he was warning me. I was driving back from my aunt's place after a quiet weekend, and it wasn't that late, but late enough that Highway 101 felt emptied out. Podcast on low, voices talking about nothing important, just something to stay alert. Hands steady on the wheel, speed under the limit. I remember thinking, if I keep it boring, I'll be fine. When the truck appeared behind me, it actually felt reassuring at first. Another car meant I wasn't alone in the fog. Another set of headlights navigating the same mess. Then the brights flashed again, not a quick flick, over and over, like tapping a pen on a desk. I checked my mirrors. The lights were smeared by the fog, making distance hard to judge. It was a big truck, tall, wide, the kind that fills your rear view even when it's not close. I changed lanes to let him pass. The flashing didn't stop. That's when it started to bother me. If you want to pass someone, you pass. You don't stay behind them and keep flashing like you're testing something. I moved back into the right lane. The flashing continued. I ran through a mental checklist, trying to stay calm. Headlights on, Phone charging, gas fine, dashboard clear. I looked at my speed, wondering if I was going too slow and irritating him. But I wasn't crawling. I was driving the way you're supposed to in fog. The next time he flashed, I tapped my brakes lightly, just enough to show him I'd noticed. The flashing stopped. Not completely, just paused, like he'd gotten what he wanted. I felt my shoulders relax, and I hated that. It bothered me how fast my body settled, just because one thing went quiet. A minute later, the flashing started again. That's when I noticed something that made everything feel wrong in a very quiet way. The flashing changed based on my speed. When I held steady, it was occasional. When I slowed, it stopped. When I sped up, it came back. Like he was correcting me. I didn't want to believe that. Nobody wants to think they're being controlled on an empty highway. So my brain offered easier explanations. Maybe there's debris ahead. Maybe there's a stalled car. Maybe he thinks my lights are off. Maybe he's trying to help and doesn't realize how aggressive it feels. But another thought kept pressing in, colder and harder to ignore. He wants me to slow down. I didn't want that thought. I pushed it away and slowed anyway, telling myself I was just being cautious. The fog thickened. Highway 101 fog isn't always a blanket, it comes in pockets. You'll see trees and signs for a second, then drive straight into a wall where the road feels smaller than it should. I hit one of those walls. Suddenly, it was just the faint lane lines and the glow of my dashboard reflecting back at me. I couldn't tell how far the truck was behind me anymore, just that it was still there. The brights flashed again. I turned the podcast down until it was barely audible, like silence would help me focus. My speed had dropped again, without me meaning to. The flashing stopped. And then I saw them, 3 silhouettes, standing on the shoulder. They didn't emerge the way people usually do. There was no movement leading up to them, no walking shapes, no gradual appearance. They were just there, positioned right where the fog was thickest, at the edge of visibility, like they'd chosen the exact spot where headlights would hit them late. They weren't walking, they were waiting. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion. My brain tried to explain it away. Stranded people, maybe. A breakdown. Someone needing help. Then one of them lifted an arm, pointing straight toward my lane. At the same time, the truck behind me held its distance. It stayed exactly where it was, like it was overseeing the moment. My car drifted toward the shoulder line because my eyes did. I corrected fast, maybe too fast, and felt the car wobble slightly, just enough to remind me how little margin I had. One of the figures stepped forward, close enough that my headlights caught details, dark clothing and bulky shapes, but nothing clear enough to identify. I hit the horn. The figure didn't move back. If anything, it leaned into the noise, like it was waiting for the reaction. I didn't think anymore. I accelerated. The fog thickened immediately. For a few seconds, I was driving blind, guided only by lane paint and instinct. My hands hurt from gripping the wheel. My eyes strained so hard they watered. Behind me, the truck's headlights surged brighter through the fog. Then the brights flashed again. I refused to look back. I kept my eyes on the road and pushed through until the fog thinned near a busier stretch, where distant headlights and signs started to appear. The truck stopped flashing. It fell back, just like that. At the first lit exit, I pulled off and parked under a streetlight near a closed restaurant. I sat there with my hands still on the wheel, trying to slow my breathing. I tried to call a friend, then stopped, because the story sounded ridiculous even to me. A truck flashed its lights, and people stood in the fog. It didn't sound like danger. It sounded like overthinking. That's the part that keeps you quiet. I called anyway and just said I needed company. I didn't explain it all. I didn't have the words yet. When I got back to campus, I didn't sleep. I kept seeing those silhouettes. Now, whenever I drive in fog, I don't think about monsters or stories. I think about headlights and how easy it is to turn traffic logic into a weapon. I was working HVAC jobs across Nevada, driving US 50 more times than I could count. This was August 2015. Middle of the desert, hot enough that the air still felt heavy even after the sun dropped. I've helped people on the side of the road before. Jumped batteries, passed out water. It's never been a big deal. So when I saw the van with its hazards blinking, I didn't feel brave or heroic. I felt responsible. Nothing about what happened after felt dramatic. It just felt wrong, like I'd stepped into something that was already in motion and didn't realize it until I was standing too close. It was the kind of desert dusk where the sun is gone, but the heat refuses to leave. Then I saw the van, hazards blinking on the shoulder, like a slow heartbeat. I eased off the gas and stared for a few seconds. You don't see many vehicles stopped out there, and when you do, it usually means something's wrong. Here's the part I still feel stupid about. I stopped because I thought about my wife. That was it, not hero instincts or curiosity. Just a mental image of her on the side of a desert highway and someone deciding not to help. I pulled my work truck in behind the van, leaving space. Habit. I park like that on job sites too, always ready to leave fast if needed. I'm an HVAC tech. I'm not law enforcement, not a tow truck, but I carry tools, water, a flashlight, and I've helped stranded people before. Dead batteries, overheating engines, normal stuff. This didn't feel normal. The van was old, off-white, no markings, hood closed, no one standing outside, no phone light glowing through the windows, just dark glass and blinking hazards. I got out with my flashlight. The hazards made everything pulse. My shadow, the shoulder, the brush beyond. I didn't walk right up to the driver window. I stopped a few steps back and called out, "Hey, y'all okay?" Then the driver window rolled down, maybe an inch, just enough for a voice to come through. "We're fine, just waiting on a friend." Male voice, not rushed, not irritated, flat. I looked at the van again. If you're fine, why are the hazards on? If you're waiting on a friend, why are you pulled over like you're broken down? If you're waiting, why is it so dark inside I can't see anyone? "Need water?" I asked. "I've got some." "No," he said immediately. Too fast. The window stayed cracked exactly where it was. I nodded like I accepted it. I shined my flashlight along the side of the van, pretending to check tires. The tint swallowed the beam. Mostly I saw my own reflection. "Car trouble?" I asked. "Battery? Overheating?" "No," he said. "We're good." The hazards kept blinking. I took a step back and heard a soft sound. Movement. Like weight moving on a bench seat. It came from deeper inside the van, not the driver's seat. It didn't sound mechanical. It sounded human. I lifted my flashlight slowly, trying to catch movement through the tint. Nothing clear, but I realized I was wrong about what kind of situation this was. "How many people you got in there?" I asked. The answer came instantly. "Just me." It didn't match the sound. I stepped back again, still nodding, still polite. "All right," I said. "Just wanted to check." As I moved, the hazards blinked, and for a brief moment the tint wasn't fully black. I saw a shape lift, quick, like a knee rising and dropping. Not the driver, further back. Then it was gone. My thoughts simplified. Don't get closer. Don't turn your back. Don't make it confrontational. I kept backing toward my truck. That's when another detail clicked. My truck was now between the van and the highway. From the road, anyone passing would mostly see my vehicle. Big, obvious, blocking the view, like I was shielding them. I got into my truck slowly. I didn't start it right away. Instead, I picked up my phone and held it to my ear. I didn't dial. I just started talking. "Yeah," I said, loud. "I'm on US 50 near mile marker. Van on the shoulder. Send highway patrol." The van's hazards shut off instantly. That darkness bothered me more than the lights ever did. I couldn't see the driver window anymore. Then I heard a quiet sound, rubber flexing. The van's side door cracked open a couple inches. Then it shut again. I turned the key and started my truck. I pulled out smoothly, like I was leaving because I'd remembered something, not because I was scared. I didn't look at the van as I passed it. I drove 10 miles before my breathing changed. 15 before I checked my mirrors, expecting headlights. When I hit service, I called it in for real, non-emergency. Gave them what I had. Approximate location, van description, hazards cutting out. They asked about plates. I didn't have them. Number of people? I didn't know. Threats? No. Later that night, I checked my dash cam. The video showed exactly what you'd expect. Van, hazards blinking, my truck's headlights lighting dust and brush. Nothing suspicious enough to convince anyone. But the audio caught it. Right after I asked how many people were inside, that soft interior movement, like someone adjusting because they'd been waiting too long. I don't know what it was. Maybe a setup, maybe nothing, maybe something worse. All I know is this. If it was nothing, the hazards wouldn't have shut off the second I said highway patrol. And if it was something, stopping to help almost put me in the wrong place. That's the part that stays with me, not the van. The fact that my best instinct was the one that almost got me trapped. My name's Jenna. I'm 29, and I work as a real estate assistant outside Lubbock. If you've ever done late showings in West Texas, you know the kind. The ones that stretch past sunset, where you're smiling and nodding long after your brain's clocked out. This happened in February of 2023, on a county road I'd taken plenty of times before, usually in daylight, usually without thinking twice. That night, I was heading home from a showing that ran long. I was tired, annoyed at myself, and more focused on my bed than the road. And then I saw a woman standing dead center in my lane, crying. I didn't slam the brakes because I'm kind. I slammed them because my brain couldn't accept what it was seeing. The road was empty. No houses, no streetlights, no other cars. Just my headlights and her shape filling the lane. When my car stopped, the silence was immediate and heavy. Even my turn signal sounded too loud. She didn't move. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. If you're actually scared or hurt or trying to flag someone down, you step toward the light. You wave. You make yourself visible. She did none of that. She stood there crying, staring at my hood like she was waiting for it to decide something. I rolled my window down just enough to speak. "Hey," I said, "are you okay?" She lifted her face like she'd been waiting for that exact question. "I need help," she said. "My phone's dead. Please." Her voice sounded right. Shaky, breathless, and convincing. "Okay," I said, already reaching for mine. "I can call someone for you." "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Can you open the door?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. "I can call 911, I said instead. "Or someone you know." "I just need to get warm," she said. "Just for a second." It wasn't that cold. Cold, yes, but not dangerous, and she was wearing a jacket. I looked past her, down both sides of the road. No car, no hazard lights, nothing. "Where's your car?" I asked. She looked toward the ditch, hesitated, then said, "Back there." I got turned around. There was nowhere to get turned around. My hands stayed tight on the wheel. "Okay," I said. "Stay there. I'm calling for help." "No," she said quickly. "Please don't. I don't want the cops." That sentence changed everything. Normal people don't negotiate help on a dark road. She stepped closer, but not into the full light. Toward my driver's side door, where the glare worked in her favor. "Just open it," she said again. Less crying now, more irritation. I lifted my phone so she could see it. "I'm calling right now." And that's when the second person appeared. From the ditch line, just beyond where my headlights reached, someone rose up. A man, hood up, hands low. My brain did the math instantly. They're together. She stopped me. He waited. If I stay, I'm choosing their rules. I rolled my window up. Her crying stopped immediately. "What are you doing?" she snapped. I hit the lock button and threw the car into reverse. She slapped her palm against my window. Behind her, the man stepped forward. I didn't wait. I shifted into drive and accelerated past them. She stepped aside at the last second, not afraid of my car at all. In my mirror, neither of them chased. When I called 911, I sounded ridiculous even to myself, like I was telling a story I wasn't sure I believed. They sent a deputy, told me not to go back, said they'd check the area. The next day, they called and said they found nothing. No people, no vehicle. I wanted relief. What I felt instead was embarrassment, like it was my fault. That's how these situations mess with you. They don't just scare you, they make you question yourself afterward. And the scariest part is that she's probably still out there, waiting for the next set of headlights to slow down and decide to be kind. If you realize the real danger wasn't the stranger, but the moment you trusted the wrong situation, go ahead, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next nightmare, and let me know which story got under your skin. And if you think the scariest part of an Airbnb is bad Wi-Fi, click now to watch 4 really disturbing Airbnb stories, because sometimes the host knows your home. Thanks for watching.
This season, you've got places to go, people to